The only thing missing from the rollout of Apple's new iPhone today, Steve Jobs. Jobs remains on medical leave, and that leaves COO Tim Cook to oversee the company's most critical product launch this year. Nevertheless, Apple shares are up almost 60% since Jobs went on leave. Now, is that just a lift from the market rally, or are investors telling us something? One person who can answer that question is Renny Ponver, CEO of Management CV, a hedge fund research firm that analyzes and ranks management teams. Renny, welcome. Thanks for being here. Tell me, what's the message here? Investors just don't seem too distressed by Steve Jobs' absence.
Eric, I think the interesting point is that investors were very nervous that Apple was only about Steve Jobs 6 months ago. And we've had a dry run of a succession plan, and now we realize it's a much better company than anyone even suspected.
How much of a bullish sign, though, is that for Apple, this stock performance that we've noted up almost 60% since he went on leave?
I think it's a tremendous sign. Tremendous sign. I think it shows that this company's got real legs to go further.
Okay, but given the fact that Jobs is still very much alive and reportedly in and out of Apple's headquarters, can we really call this a dry run or a beta test for succession?
I think so, because what you've seen is that both Tim Cook, the COO, and Peter Oppenheimer, the CFO, have handled this period beautifully, stably, and posted results that are superb. Usually, you know, it's interesting because Steve Jobs is the exception that proves the rule about celebrity CEOs.
Okay, but let's be fair for a moment. Jobs hasn't been out that long. He hasn't been out a full product cycle. Everything that Apple's rolling out now has been in development for a while, and it's a big company that's been doing well for some time. So many of the processes and systems they have in place, to a degree, run themselves, and if not, the people who are in those jobs know what to do.
Well, I would agree, but I would also say that Tim Cook, the COO and sort of heir apparent, if you will, to Steve Jobs, is actually the guy that makes the gears spin behind the curtain at Apple.
Okay, so he may be the operations wizard, but what about product development? Everybody credits Apple with being such a great innovator as a result of Steve Jobs himself. You know, how does that play in here?
Well, and I think it's true. I think that Steve Jobs is obviously the brilliant visionary that he's often pronounced as. And the pipeline of products they have is definitely due to him. However, it's also about execution from an investor standpoint. And the execution for Apple has been superb and looks to us to be smooth sailing going forward.
Okay, but let's use Palm as a comparison, for example. We're just showing a picture of Tim Cook so people familiarize themselves with him. But let's bring up the example of Jonathan Rubinstein. Here's a guy, a former Apple developer, who was hired at Palm. He developed the Pre, but he hasn't really reinvented the wheel the way Steve Jobs did. He's only created a rival product. So let's say Steve Jobs hypothetically does get pushed or somehow is out of the picture. Who can we rely on to be that visionary at Apple and to drive growth in the years ahead?
Well, so let's compare exactly John Rubinstein versus, let's say, Tim Cook as prospective CEO. We look at Palm and see all sorts of risks. We see an imminent litigation risk there. We see a Me Too product line. We see much higher costs and much less attractive returns over time looking forward for investors. With Apple, it's exactly the opposite. We see a steady hand in Tim Cook. We see growing operating margins. We see all the sort of momentum characteristics in operations that tend to make for tremendous stocks through time.
Okay, so let's ask the key question. Right now, Steve Jobs is going to be coming back. Should he do what Bill Gates did? Should he hand off the CEO title to Tim Cook, perhaps, and take the title of chairman, something of that nature?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, and I think that that's probably likely in Apple's game book. You'd see Steve Jobs come back, reassure the market a little bit, though I don't think it's as nervous as it used to be. He'll probably move to something like a chairman's role at the end of the year, and you could see Tim Cook as CEO going into the new year.
All right, some real insight there. Thank you very much. Renny Ponver, CEO of Management CV. We've been talking about Steve Jobs and Apple.